feel like I'm reading The Red Queen all over again, and I did not like that book, so I've not really been having a great time.
If you watched my last video, you probably saw me pick up this book called Powerless by Lauren Roberts because I wanted to do a reading vlog on this. I saw that this book was super viral on BookTok. Every single book girly is reading this. I also saw in my local bookshop that this was at the #1 spot of the best-selling books of all of, I think, the entire month. I really didn't have a lot of desire to read this book because it sounds like the next generic YA book. It sounded like Fourth Wing. And if you've watched that video of me reading that book, you know that I do not like mediocre YA fantasy books, and this just sounded like another rehash of the same 5 plot devices that I've read multiple times over. But everything for YouTube, everything for, the audience. I actually already started it. I'm 100 pages through. If you do not know what The Powerless is about, we live in a world where a plague caused tons and tons of people to gain supernatural powers. If you do not have this supernatural power, if you do not have an ability, you basically get sentenced to death because you're ordinary and you are worth shit. So essentially, if you did not catch COVID-19, sucks for you because you're gonna die. Now, in this book, we follow Kaidyn, and Kaidyn was sadly enough not blessed by COVID-19, so she has not received any magical supernatural abilities, so she's considered an ordinary or a normal person. But because of that, she's obviously being chased by government authorities or by the king. So she tries to hide by posing as a mundane. And mundanes are people with supernatural abilities, but they do not manifest it outwardly. Like, they do not have telekinesis, like they cannot see that they have abilities. It's more mental or psychic. So she poses as a psychic, as someone who can read people in order to hide from the authorities. Now, the kicker is that she gets chosen to take part in the trials, which is basically like the Hunger Games, but in this world, you're kind of honored to partake in the trials. If you're chosen to be part of this gruesome affair, it is because you're considered a hero, you're considered to be great, essentially, by the general public. So the reason why Kaidyn gets chosen is because she ended up saving Kai, who's a prince, obviously, because, why can a regular person never be with a regular person? It has to be with a prince. So this super hot, cute prince called Kai got attacked on the streets, and Kaidyn was the one who ended up saving him. And because of that, she's considered a hero by her peers and gets nominated. And naturally, Kai is also part of the trials because, it's very illogical to have the prince join a fucking lethal trial anyway. And he also has like the best abilities in the world because he's able to steal people's powers. Like, he can use them against them. So basically every person's power he can use for himself. And so Kai and Kaidyn both end up partaking in the trials, and that is kind of where, for me, the story left off. I'm now at the part where this is essentially like the Hunger Games, where all of the people that got elected to be part of the trials are having fancy dinners, they're being prepared, they're getting trained to eventually, slaughter each other. I'm not particularly excited to be reading this. I don't necessarily gravitate to these kinds of books anymore. Fourth Wing was something. Although, up until now, I haven't cringed as much as I cringed with Fourth Wing. The characters aren't as predictable. The bar is low. The bar is low. See you at my next update.
So I've made some progress on Powerless, and I've basically come to the conclusion that this book is a remix of The Red Queen and The Hunger Games. Because I was reading this book, and the entire time I was thinking, oh my god, this book, the plot of this book reminds me of another book that I've read before, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what book it was until I was talking to a friend of mine who basically said to me hey, I saw on your booktube that you did a book haul and you included Powerless and you bought it. And I've been thinking about reading it myself because I heard that it was compared to The Red Queen a lot, and I was like, oh my god, this makes so much sense. It reminds me of The Red Queen. And if you have followed me on my Bookstagram or on my Goodreads, you will know that I absolutely despise The Red Queen. It is one of my least favorite book series. I thought it was so predictable. I thought it was so stupid. And the fact that this book reminds me of The Red Queen does not bode well. Essentially, if you do not know what The Red Queen is about, it is very similar to this book, where we live in a society where people are divided in between people with supernatural powers and non-supernatural powers. If you have a special ability, you're called a silver, and you also bleed silver, and you get like additional rights. You're basically considered elite, you're considered the best of the best, and you get more opportunities, as opposed to reds who bleed red blood and also have no special abilities. They don't have a lot of rights compared to the silvers, and they also are, I think, at the age of 18 have to join the army. The only difference in Powerless is that if you do not have a supernatural ability, you just get executed. So like, aside from that too, in the first book of Red Queen, the main character gets invited to court because I think she ends up like starting as a kitchen servant or something along those lines. It's been a long time since I read that book. But she joins the court, and then it turns out that she's a silver, so she actually has a special ability. Spoiler alert, but like, I don't really like that book, so it's not like I'm spoiling anything great. And in Powerless, Kaidyn also kind of joins the court in the first book, so she receives luxuries and receives like special treatment, just like the main character in the Red Queen did. I have no clue what her name is, I'm sorry. And what I also see coming from a mile away is that in the Red Queen, our main character falls in love, or has like a love triangle with the princess. And essentially Kaidyn is paving the same path. Like, she has an obsession with Kai, and Kit, the prince, is also like the crown prince, is also interested in her. So like, it's basically the same book, just with some Hunger Games elements thrown in there. It would also not surprise me if Kaidyn ends up having a supernatural ability, but we'll see if that actually ends up happening. Aside from that, the book is told in a double POV, so we follow Kaidyn's perspective and Kai's perspective, which most of the time I don't mind, but what I found a bit strange is that the author tends to overlap the conversations. So for example, if there's a conversation between Kaidyn and Kai, you sometimes hear it twice, because you hear it from Kaidyn's perspective and in the next chapter from Kai's, and I just think that's a bit strange. Like, I don't want to be rereading the same scene, just move on. You're not really giving me any additional information aside from the fact that they seem to find each other hot. Lastly, what I do like about Kaidyn's character is the way that she poses as a psychic, because like I said, she is ordinary, she doesn't have any powers, but she poses as a psychic, as someone who can read people. Very similar to what they do in the Hunger Games, the candidates kind of have to present themselves and show off their special abilities and become like likable in order to get fans and get opportunities that way, like sponsors and stuff like that. The way that she fakes being a psychic is by basically going Sherlock on them. If you've ever watched Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch, or just if you've read any of the Sherlock Holmes books, the way that Sherlock kind of like solves murders is by deduction or deducing things. So he will, for example, look at a certain person, and by the way that he is walking or the way that he's presenting himself, the clothes that he's wearing, he'll be able to tell like, oh, you've been to the butcher's this morning and your dad has died recently. Like, he's able to just deduce everything. And Kaidyn kind of does the same thing. So for example, by looking at a person's necklace and seeing a ring on the necklace and being like, oh, there's no way that that ring belongs to her because it is too big, but it could also not belong to her husband because she's too young, so it must have belonged to a father, but the only reason you're wearing a necklace or a ring around your neck is if it's sentimental, so her father must have died. Like, I kind of like that particular aspect, but it feels very Sherlock to me.
Afghanistan or Iraq.
Aside from that, I find it quite predictable. The entire like girl gets invited to court and has all of the luxuries that she normally does not have, and then becomes disillusioned kind of storyline is just something that's quite overdone in fantasy, in my opinion. The fact that this is so similar to the Red Queen and the Hunger Games is not really helping in making it original for me. So yeah, I'll keep you updated. Hi, it's a couple of days later. I've made some progress in Powerless, and you're probably wondering, why hasn't she been doing any of those like reading montages where I'm like showing you that I'm physically reading the book? That's because I've been exclusively listening to this as an audiobook in order to get through the plot quicker, because I'm not really enjoying myself anymore at this point. This is not to be like one of those cynical book hating people here on the platform and to like bash every single book that's being promoted on BookTok. I think that platform is amazing in having people get interested in reading again. Without BookTok, the entire craze for romantasy and romance and fantasy and just all of the books that are being pushed right now wouldn't exist without BookTok. So I very much appreciate it as a way to have people interested in reading again. What I don't like about this book and books like Fourth Wing, for example, is in my opinion, they don't really add anything to the genre. Especially in this book, I feel like I'm reading at least 3 different books that I've read before, hashed into one giant plot hole. The actual like fantasy element of this book, the world building and the magic system is so limited, so contrived. There is barely any bones to the world building. The majority of this book reads like a combination of tons of romance tropes, and the only reason why it's a fantasy is because the author needed to create certain scenarios where the tropes would make sense. For example, there are tons of balls in this book, and the only reason why I think there are so many balls in here is in order for the love interest to be able to look at the main character and be in awe with how beautiful she looks when she comes down the beautiful staircase. There's also a lot of forced proximity. There's also the trope of having them tend each other's wounds at a certain point in the arena. Also, the trials that are in the book have been done a million times over. There's a labyrinth, there's a capture the flag kind of trial, and what was the first one again? The first one is like literally the Hunger Games. It's like Battle Royale from Fortnite, where you have to kill each other. Also, the similarities with the Red Queen are so obvious that I don't get why she's not been sued for like copyright infringement. For example, there's an organization called the Resistance, which I know is a very common word, but in the Red Queen, that organization also exists, and it has the exact same function as the organization in this book. Like, they're made up of people with no powers or with fatals, which are in this world supernatural wielders who have abilities that are so dangerous that they are also being hunted for that and being executed. A very similar organization called the Resistance is also part of the Red Queen with the exact same function. They also do the exact same thing. Like in the Red Queen, there's a certain point where there's also a ball. There are a lot of balls in these books. During that ball, the Resistance basically bombs the place. That is kind of like the way that they make people become aware of their existence, and it also happens in this book. I feel like I'm reading The Red Queen all over again, and I did not like that book, so I've not really been having a great time. Also, maybe I'm the stupid one, but I don't, for the love of God, don't understand why Kai, a prince in this kingdom, is allowed to partake in the trials. Like, you have Kit, he's the crown prince, but he's the second prince. If Kit ends up dying, Kai will have to become king. Like, why is he allowed to partake in the trials? It makes, like, government-wise, kingdom-wise, like, it makes no sense. No kingdom would ever allow that to happen, but for some reason, it is considered an honor. It's considered obligatory for him to partake into the trials because he has the best powers of the entire kingdom and he has to prove himself. For who? For who? Because he's going to be the next enforcer of the king. If he dies and Kit dies, the kingdom is without a king. So like, So yeah, the next clip will probably be me wrapping up this reading vlog because I'm almost finished with it, and honestly, I'm also very much done with this book.
So I finished Powerless, or Powerless finished me, I'm not quite sure yet. I'm gonna try and keep the wrap up of this book as spoiler free as I can. I don't really think that I've been spoiling anything throughout the video either, and in case you still want to read the book, I'll try and keep it as spoiler free as I can. If I were to compare this to Fourth Wing, because that is like the most recent fantasy booktok book that I've read, I do think that I prefer Fourth Wing over Powerless, just because if it comes to like the actual story of that book, like the dragons and the academy and everything, that is not something that I've seen before in YA or in fantasy, whereas Powerless is just like a carbon copy of the Red Queen and the Hunger Games. Like, I don't really see any original content in this, and I know this might sound extreme, like I'm sure that the author took her time to come up with the story, but if you've read either of those books, I mean, this is a carbon copy. I cannot not see the similarities with the Red Queen. It's just very, very obvious. I do have to say, in this day and age, it is quite refreshing to have a fantasy series or a romance series or a romantasy, whatever this genre may be, where there's no smut. This is a very clean book. There are no sex scenes. It is very appropriate, I guess, for young teens to be reading this. There's not really any sexual content. That is something that I've not really been seeing anymore in fantasy or romantasy. Props to the author for not including smut. Maybe in the next installments there are very explicit scenes, but I don't even think there's one kissing scene and that's it. So As for how it wraps up, I'm sad to say that I predicted almost everything that happened in the book. I must say that I was surprised that the main character didn't end up having any powers. I genuinely thought that that was going to happen because, you know, every single YA main character ends up developing a power that is like way better than everyone else's. Kaidyn stays an ordinary. Maybe it develops throughout the series, I don't know, but I do like that Peyton ends up just being a normal girl. Aside from that, something that bothered me quite a lot is the way that the villain is portrayed in this book. Obviously, Peyton is very angry with the king in this storyline because the king was the person who ended up killing her father. She kind of wants to avenge his death too throughout the book. That's not really a spoiler. I think it's probably even mentioned in like the first chapter. I was gonna check if it's on the cover, but I don't think so. Something that I didn't really like about the king, or the villain in this case, is that he is a very cookie cutter, stereotypical villain. Like, if you've ever seen Avatar The Last Airbender, he's like Ozai. He's like big, bad, evil dude who will kill everyone. I like my villains a bit more layered than that. Maybe that'll develop throughout the series, but in my opinion, it was a very straightforward, I'm the bad guy villain, and I don't really like that in my fantasies or just in general. Give me a villain with depth. Show me that they have, you know, a personality. He just sounded like Ozai.
I have all the power in the world!
As for if I would recommend this book, honestly, I think I will give the same advice that I gave with Fourth Wing. If you're someone who has not really been acquainted with the romantasy genre or with the fantasy genre and you're looking for a book that can get you into it, Powerless is a great choice because it's very generic. It is a very good introduction in the genre that way. But if you've read books from, for example, V. Schwab or Leigh Bardugo, in my opinion, their fantasies and their stories are way more thought through. Their world building is way more in depth. They have very interesting magic systems, characters that look and feel diverse and feel like they're not just taken from a different book and had their names changed. Don't really think I will be continuing the series. So sadly enough, Powerless for me is another loss on the booktok front, but you know, they've also recommended me A Song of Achilles and Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, so like those books turned out to be some of my favorites. I guess it's just a matter of picking the right ones. About Powerless, sadly not for me. I'm sorry if this wasn't really a proper reading vlog, I just wasn't really in the mood to film myself reading a book that I really did not enjoy reading. I hope you can understand. Hopefully next time I'll pick a book that I actually enjoy, because I feel like I've been filming reading vlogs of books that I don't like, and I feel like I need to change that. Thank you very much for watching. If you ended up reading Powerless, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you liked it, if you disliked it, I love hearing everyone's opinions. And I'm gonna do a shameless plug. If you're not subscribed, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, ciao!